I didn't move out to the edge of town for trouble. I came for peace-wide skies and a bit of redemption. After 22 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, 4 deployments, 2 surgeries, and 1 marriage that didn't survive, I bought 7 acres just outside a sleepy HOA neighborhood called Coyote Glen. It wasn't my dream home yet, but the land had bones. There were old fence posts leaning like tired men, a half-buried irrigation trench, and an abandoned well that whispered stories when the wind pushed through the cracked wood cap. It was quiet. Too quiet, maybe. I didn't mind that the HOA was technically adjacent. Their manicured subdivision backed up to my eastern property line, but I figured they'd keep to their lawns and let me work my land. I had plans, not just for a house, but for a working ranch, a small one, modest, chickens, maybe goats, a self-sustaining project powered by solar running on discipline and old-fashioned grit. It felt right. I needed something to build with my hands again. The first few weeks were full of sunrises and sawdust. I cleared brush. I set stakes for a new barn. I leveled ground for a prefab shed that would serve as my workshop. Every swing of the hammer quieted something restless in me. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, my dog Duke barked at the fence. That's when I met Karen. She appeared in pressed khakis, a salmon pink blouse, and a lanyard around her neck, with a laminated HOA badge, swinging like she was some kind of park ranger. "I'm Karen Delaney," she said, not offering a handshake. Vice chair of the Coyote Glen Architectural Committee. I wiped sweat from my brow, nodding politely. "You're new here," she said, as if I hadn't noticed. "Name's Matt," I replied, just getting settled. She squinted past me toward the half-framed shed. "Is that a permitted structure?" I paused. "County permits filed and posted," I said, gesturing toward the plastic sleeve pinned to the stake near the driveway. Karen didn't look. She sniffed. "Well, Coyote Glen has design standards for adjacent properties," she said. "You'll need to submit plans to our committee." I blinked. "I'm not part of your HOA." She smiled without warmth. "All bordering properties must maintain compatibility with the neighborhood's aesthetic. It's in our extended covenant," which I never signed, I said calmly. Karen didn't argue. She just wrote something in her little notepad and turned on her heel. I watched her walk back across the property line, her heels crunching over the gravel path like punctuation marks. Duke growled low. I should have known that was only the beginning. The next day, a flyer was taped to my gate. Violation notice, unauthorized shed construction. A copy of the HOA extended standards was attached with highlighter bleeding across vague terms like visual continuity and community harmony. Then came the emails. Apparently, someone on the HOA board had gotten a hold of my public permit filings and started combing through every detail. I was being challenged on the width of my driveway expansion, on my fencing materials, even on the placement of my solar panels. I called the county inspector's office. They confirmed everything was in order. Still, the HOA kept calling, emailing, and sending people out to observe. One man parked his Prius across my driveway for 20 minutes just to take photos. Another woman hovered with binoculars near the shared fence line, pretending to watch birds. It was petty, but it started to wear on me. See, I'd faced insurgents overseas. I'd faced bureaucratic messes inside the Pentagon. But I wasn't prepared for the warfare of weaponized suburban politics. Karen sent a friendly reminder that all exterior structures must match the community's neutral earth tone palette. Then she sent a list of HOA-approved paint vendors. Then a compliance deadline. I didn't even have internet yet, only a hotspot and a 1,000-pound generator. So I did what I was trained to do. I documented everything. Every letter, every photo, every email. I put up motion-activated cameras. I started logging license plates of HOA board members who loitered near my land. And I made a folder labeled Coyote Glen Potential Violations. I didn't strike back, not yet, but something told me I might have to. I'd bought this land to build to breathe. But somehow the HOA saw me as a threat, and I hadn't even finished laying the foundation yet. I thought I was building a ranch. Turned out I was stepping into a quiet war. And Karen, she wasn't just a neighbor, she was a general in pearls. It started with that first visit, but Karen didn't stay behind the line she'd drawn in the dirt. She kept showing up. Not with cookies or small talk. No, she came like she was conducting inspections. She'd walk right up to the edge of my gravel driveway, clipboard in hand, tapping her pen like a metronome of judgment. One morning, I was unloading a pallet of lumber from a flatbed when I saw her again standing just beyond the fence arms crossed. You know, she called out noise ordinances. Apply after 6 p.m. on weekdays. I looked at my watch. It was 4:52. I didn't answer. I just set the wood down louder than necessary and kept going. That night, I got an email sent to me my realtor and CC'd to the entire Coyote Glen board. It was titled Ongoing Violations from Unaffiliated Parcel Owner Adjacent to HOA. It accused me of auditory disturbances, visual disharmony, and aggressive landscaping techniques. That last one made me laugh out loud. I'd trimmed some mesquite shrubs near the property line. Apparently, I was now an aggressive landscaper. I replied with a scanned copy of my county permit and a sentence I'd write again many times. I am not a member of your HOA. I am in full compliance with county zoning and construction codes. They didn't care. 2 days later, a city compliance vehicle pulled into my lot. The driver, a young guy named Kyle, looked sheepish. "Hey man," he said, stepping out and glancing around. "Got a complaint about noise and improper stormwater runoff." I raised an eyebrow. "It's been bone dry for 3 weeks." Kyle shrugged. "Yeah, I figured." They filed some forms, so I got to take a look. I showed him my trenching plans, walked him through the drainage channels, pointed out the erosion netting. He nodded, took a few pictures, then shook my hand. "You're squared away," he said. "I'll close it out." But the next morning, another flyer was taped to my gate. Notice of unauthorized soil movement. Attached. A poorly cropped photo of me with a shovel. It was clear now Karen wasn't just filing complaints. She was manufacturing a case. She began citing obscure HOA buffer zone policies, claiming that my ranch disturbed neighborhood visual integrity. She even submitted a proposal to the board, suggesting they expand their HOA boundaries by annexing peripheral parcels like mine. That's when I called an attorney. His name was Greg Trujillo, local guy. Sharp used to handle land disputes out in Santa Fe before coming back home. I handed him the pile of flyers, emails, citations, photos. He flipped through them and chuckled. "She's throwing spaghetti at the wall," he said. "But if she finds the right code enforcer, it might stick." He drafted a cease and desist letter and mailed it to the HOA, stating clearly that 1. My property was not under their jurisdiction. 2. Their repeated actions could constitute harassment and tortious interference. 3. Any further unauthorized access would be considered trespassing. For a while, it went quiet. Then one afternoon, I came back from the feed store and found a woman in a neon vest standing on my land measuring something with a wheel. I parked and walked toward her slowly. "Can I help you?" She jumped a little and turned around. Karen asked me to confirm the property line for HOA compliance. I didn't smile. "This isn't HOA land. This is my land. You're trespassing." She stammered, lowered her clipboard. I pointed to the marker staked clearly at the corner, surveyed, filed, and recorded with the county 3 years before I even bought the place. I told her to leave. She did. But I wasn't done. I checked my cameras. Sure enough, Karen had been by earlier. She hadn't stepped foot on my property, but she'd stood on the other side of the line directing the woman like a foreman. I printed the footage. I filed another complaint with the sheriff this time. "You're not the first one," the deputy told me. "She's done this to a few folks. Gets away with it because most people just move." I wasn't most people. I was building something here, not just a ranch, but a life that didn't answer to the petty fears of pearl-wearing tyrants. Still, she was chipping away. Weeks passed. Suppliers started calling me, saying they got calls questioning the legality of delivering materials to my site. One even canceled a delivery. Then the city sent me a letter. Temporary hold on agricultural structure, permit. Reason pending zoning clarification. I called Greg. He sighed. "They're leaning on someone in the zoning office. It's soft pressure, but effective." That's when it hit me. Karen wasn't just a bored busybody. She was organized, connected, and she had the HOA's legal budget behind her. She was building a wall around me, one petty citation, one passive-aggressive letter, one fake complaint at a time. But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent my career designing infrastructure under hostile fire. I knew how to build, and I knew how to dismantle. I wasn't looking for a fight. But if they kept pushing, I'd turn this quiet war into a reckoning. And it would start with what I found underground. The day after the city paused my permit, I found a bright orange flag planted in my pasture. It had the HOA's logo on it printed, laminated, and zip-tied to a plastic stake as if they thought it belonged there. It marked nothing. No buried line, no construction boundary, just a quiet warning. We see you. I yanked it up and tossed it into the burn barrel. But I didn't light it yet. Instead, I climbed into the attic of my temporary shed and pulled out my old Army surveyor's gear. Laser rangefinder soil scanner, high-res drone tools from another life. Tools meant for terrain mapping and engineering solutions under pressure. This time, the mission was personal. While I began mapping the land again, every foot, every inch, I kept logging the harassment. Karen escalated her efforts like she had something to prove. I'd underestimated how far she'd go. First came the mailbox. One morning, I found it open mail gone. No wind that day. No neighbors on my rural stretch. Just a bent flag and a gut feeling. I filed a report with the Postal Service and installed a lockbox. 3 days later, that box had a dent the size of a boot heel. Then the calls started. Real estate agents, appraisers, surveyors I never hired. All asking the same thing. I heard you might be selling. No, I said every time. Who told you that? Silence. Then a board member reached out on your behalf. They were trying to smoke me out, pressure me to give up the land and move on. Karen wasn't just trying to control my project, she was trying to erase me from the neighborhood. I kept documenting. Emails, phone logs, photographs. I started backing up everything to 3 drives, 1 on site, 2 off. I knew enough about warfare to know if your enemy escalates, you escalate your documentation. But they weren't done. One Thursday afternoon, I was welding reinforcement brackets for the goat shelter when I heard Duke growling near the fence again. I walked over and saw 3 members of the HOA board, Karen, a man named Carter, and a woman named Shelby, all lined up in pastel polos and clipboards like they were filming a reality show. They weren't on my property, not technically, but they were close. Too close. Can I help you? I called out. Karen stepped forward. We're conducting a visual inspection for community compatibility. Of what I asked. Your fencing, she replied, and your choice of materials. It appears to violate the neutral tone restriction in the HOA manual. I looked at the fencing's sturdy cedar, untreated, slowly silvering in the sun. Exactly what the county permitted. Again, I said, keeping my voice calm, I'm not under your HOA. Shelby scribbled something. Karen smiled with exaggerated patience. Whether you like it or not, your property affects our home values. I stepped forward. Then maybe you should have bought it when it was for sale. Carter looked like he wanted to say something, but Karen raised a hand. Let's go, she said. We'll document this. And they walked off. That night, my power flickered. Only for a second, but it was enough to make me pause. I checked my generator. Still running. Solar inverter stable. Lines no damage. But something was wrong. I pulled the blueprints I'd gotten with the property, dated 5 years back, and compared them with my new scan data. There was a section near the eastern property line where the ground compacted differently, like something had been dug and covered. I noted it, but didn't act yet. The next morning, the harassment moved online. A Facebook post appeared in the Coyote Glen residents group. Is a goat farm coming to our family neighborhood? Health risks. Odor, noise. Discuss. Karen didn't post it, but she liked every comment that followed. My name came up again and again. Makes the area feel trashy. I heard he has propane tanks just sitting out. Someone should call the fire marshal. They didn't tag me, they just weaponized rumor. But I wasn't alone. That same afternoon, a woman named Marlene knocked on my gate. She looked to be in her 60s, sun hat jeans, and a cooler in hand. I brought iced tea, she said. You look like you could use something other than grief. I opened the gate and let her in. Turns out Marlene had lived on the next lot over for 22 years before the HOA even existed. They tried to pull the same thing on me when I built my greenhouse, she said, sipping from a mason jar. They have no power over you. But they think if they say it with confidence, it's law. She offered to testify if I ever needed someone. You're not crazy, she said. They're just louder. I thanked her and watched her go. And that night, I sat under the stars and realized something. Karen thought she was running a war of attrition, but she'd forgotten I'd served in real ones. What she called pressure, I called Tuesday. Still, what worried me most wasn't the gossip or the flags or even the power games. It was that strange section of earth. That part of the land no one mentioned, but someone had used. And it was right behind her backyard. I was in the middle of laying down foundation blocks for the barn when the county inspector pulled into my driveway. He stepped out, clipboard under one arm and an apologetic look already on his face. Matt, I'm sorry, he said before I could even greet him. We got a formal injunction request from the Coyote Glen HOA. Your permit's on hold pending review. I straightened up, wiped the grit off my gloves. For what reason? He hesitated. Environmental disturbance, possible water table impact, noise pollution from projected livestock units, and a complaint about potential chemical runoff. My chest tightened. All of that is speculation, I said. There's no livestock yet. I've complied with every code. I have erosion netting rainwater capture. No chemicals, no contamination. He nodded. I know. I've been out here. It's textbook. But if someone files the right paperwork, it forces a pause while the zoning board reviews. And they've done just that. Behind his words was a weariness, like he'd seen this play out before. The abuse of process through paperwork. The bleeding of projects not through force, but through patience and attrition. He left me with a packet of forms and a printed notice taped to the fence post near my gate. Stop work. Pending environmental review. It fluttered in the breeze like a white flag I hadn't raised. I stood there, sweat still clinging to my neck, staring at the sign like it might burn itself away if I glared hard enough. But it didn't. That evening, I found out just how far Karen had gone. She'd submitted a community impact report to the county, 27 pages, signed by 5 board members and 6 residents, at least 3 of whom I knew had never spoken to me. It cited degraded air quality, vermin attraction, potential water contamination, and my favorite unsightly structures reminiscent of pre-zoning blight. Pre-zoning blight. That was rich coming from a neighborhood built over bulldozed orchards. The report was dense with speculative language. May result in, could pose a threat to, potential for. It didn't prove anything, but it didn't need to. It bought time. Time I didn't have. I called Greg again. This is coordinated, I told him. They're stalling me out. He agreed. She's leveraging nuisance law and exaggerating its reach, but the county will need a few weeks, maybe more. And during that time, you can't pour concrete, can't bring in livestock. If you do, they'll file injunctions, and it'll get ugly. I looked out the window past the plastic-covered lumber pile toward the quiet line of cedar fencing where Karen's backyard peeked just over the ridge. Her porch lights were glowing, string lights, perfectly symmetrical flower beds. Her roar wasn't loud, it was calculated. A week passed, then 2. My work stopped. My suppliers canceled further deliveries. My building permits remained under review. In the silence, I noticed things I hadn't before. A faint hum every time I walked near the east trench. It wasn't constant, but on certain nights just after dusk, I'd hear it again. Not the hum of a generator. Something lower like buried current. I pulled out the old survey again. Then I walked the trench myself, flashlight in hand. At the midpoint between my solar array and the fence line, I found an old rusted conduit box, barely visible beneath the weeds. I brushed away the dirt. It was locked, but not sealed. I pried it open. Inside was a mess of wires, some dead, some not. I tested a few with my voltmeter. One line was still hot, and it didn't trace back to my system. I followed the line, literally crawling on my stomach beneath the tall grass, until I reached the back of Karen's property. There, near the hedges behind her tool shed, was a small green junction box, half hidden behind decorative lattice. It looked new. Too new. I took photos, marked coordinates. Then I called Greg. I think they're running HOA electricity through my property, I said. You're sure? I've got voltage. I've got GPS data. And I've got a photo of the junction on their side. But it's tapping through a box on my land. He exhaled slow. If you're right, that's an unpermitted utility easement and a violation of multiple state utility codes. Can I shut it down? He paused. Not yet. Let me file a notice of encroachment first. If they contest, we'll file a cease and desist. Then, if they ignore it, we go nuclear. I looked back at the trench. I could feel the heat rising behind my ribs. Karen had frozen my project with lies. But she'd buried her own secrets on my land. This wasn't about fences anymore. This was about control, territory, power. And now, finally, I had some of it. The next morning, I taped a laminated sign above the old conduit box. Private utility access. Permit required. Monitored. I installed 2 new cameras, one infrared, one motion tracked. I logged the electrical readings. I built a secondary breaker panel from scratch, just in case. And then I waited. Karen thought she'd buried the past beneath my dirt. But I was an engineer. I knew how to dig. And soon she'd see just how deep I was willing to go. The moment I posted that sign, the atmosphere shifted. It was subtle at first. Karen didn't storm up to the fence or send more warnings. No emails. No HOA newsletters with passive-aggressive reminders About neighborhood values, nothing. But 2 nights later at 2:17 a.m., my security camera sent an alert. I rolled over in bed, rubbed the sleep from my eyes, and checked the feed on my tablet. Infrared footage showed 2 figures crouching near the trench, one holding a flashlight, the other moving quickly toward the utility box I had just labeled. They didn't stay long. 10 minutes at most. Then they vanished into the dark, careful not to trip my floodlights. I reviewed the footage frame by frame. One of them had a familiar outline, shorter frame, stiff in the hips. Karen. She hadn't come to argue this time. She'd come to see what I knew. The next morning, I inspected the box. The lock was intact, but the dirt around it was freshly disturbed. They'd been trying to confirm if I was bluffing. I wasn't. Greg filed the Notice of Encroachment with the City Utilities Commission and the County Land Office. He also sent a formal letter to the Coyote Glen HOA citing violation of private utility access, potential trespass, and unauthorized infrastructure placement. We gave them 10 business days to respond. I spent those 10 days preparing for the next phase. I dug out my old blueprints from the Army Corps schematics for rural power routing easement standards and trench mapping. It was amazing how similar HOA infrastructure could be to forward operating bases when it came to hidden cabling. I used the drone next. Low-altitude, high-resolution mapping over the property line. Then I overlaid the images with existing public utility maps. And there it was. A cable line, newer, lighter casing cutting through the back quadrant of my land before curving underground toward the Coyote Glen clubhouse. Right through the disputed trench. On paper, that line didn't exist. No public record. No utility permit. Which meant someone had installed it privately and illegally. I rented a ground-penetrating radar unit from a contractor buddy in Albuquerque. Duke watched curiously as I scanned every inch of that back quarter. By day 3, I had a full image. 2 conduits, one likely for data, one carrying low-voltage electricity, and both running under my ranch without permission. I sent everything to Greg. "Is this enough?" I asked. He didn't even hesitate. "Absolutely. You can shut it off." "But should I?" He paused. "They'll retaliate. Count on it." "But legally, you'd be within your rights. It's your land. Your utilities. No easement. No consent." I walked out to the trench that night. The sun was low shadows stretching like fingers across the ridgeline. Duke padded behind me silent. I opened the utility box, checked the voltage one more time. Still hot. Still live. I waited. Waited for that old voice in my head, the one that used to whisper hesitation when I was about to press too hard. But it didn't come. Not this time. I threw the breaker I'd installed. The hum stopped. I stood there in the sudden quiet. The silence buzzed louder than the current ever had. Then I walked back to the house. I didn't hear anything that night. No knocks, no emails, no HOA agents with their clipboards. But the next morning I saw her. Karen. She was standing in her backyard robe, tied tight, yelling into her phone. From where I stood on my deck, coffee in hand, I couldn't hear her exact words. But I could read her body. She was panicked. She wasn't just surprised that the power went out. She was angry someone had the nerve to push back. Later that day, the HOA sent an official letter. It wasn't apology, it wasn't even denial. It was a bus request for negotiated utility easement. The audacity. They wanted me to sign a retroactive agreement granting them legal right to continue routing power across my land for community benefit, they said. Greg reviewed it and laughed. "Unbelievable," he said. "They're trying to gaslight you into giving up your leverage." I didn't sign. Instead, I drafted my own response. To the Coyote Glen Homeowners Association. Your infrastructure was installed on my private property without notice, consent, or legal agreement. Your HOA knowingly accessed land you do not own to service electrical lines for community and clubhouse benefit. This is a violation of state utility code and trespass statutes. No agreement will be considered. Power remains cut until full removal of unauthorized infrastructure is completed. All further encroachment will be documented and prosecuted. I printed it on heavy paper, signed it in ink, and hand-delivered a copy by taping it to the clubhouse door. It stayed there for 3 days. By the end of the week, the neighborhood buzzed like a hornet's nest. Residents were upset. The clubhouse had gone dark. The HOA's backup generator was faulty. Emails flew across Facebook. Karen posted a community update that danced around the issue without admitting fault. But the truth was leaking out. Marlene dropped by with fresh eggs. "You know they're losing it, right?" she said. "They're blaming a contractor error now." But word's spreading fast. I nodded. "They're cornered. They just don't know it yet." She smiled and looked toward the trench. They picked the wrong rancher to mess with. I didn't say it aloud, but I felt it. This wasn't the end. Karen would strike back, but she was bleeding power now, literally and figuratively. And for the first time since this war started, I held the switch. If cutting the power was a declaration of war, then what came next was reconnaissance. I knew Karen. She wasn't going to admit fault. She'd twist, redirect, distract, anything but confess. So if I wanted the upper hand to last, I needed proof strong enough to hold up not just in front of a judge, but in front of the entire neighborhood. And I was going to get it. First, I mapped everything again. This time, I expanded the drone radius to include the HOA's utility cluster near the clubhouse. I traced the buried lines, the direction of their conduit, and the timing of their installation based on digital overlays of archived satellite imagery. It was subtle, but it was there. Between the spring of 2019 and the fall of 2020, a trench had been dug across what would become my property. At the time, the parcel had belonged to a developer who left it fallow, so there had been no one to stop them. That was when they did it. They ran underground cabling across private land, assuming no one would care. No easement, no filing, no permission. When I bought the property in late 2022, they figured I'd never notice. And if I did, they'd intimidate me into silence. Too bad for them, I wasn't built for silence. I requested county land records, power permits, and HOA infrastructure filings under the New Mexico Inspection of Public Records Act, IPRA, our version of FOIA. It took a week. The day the envelope arrived from the county office, I didn't even make it back into the house before opening it. There it was, the plat map. No easement recorded. No mention of utility rights. And best of all, a handwritten notation from 2017 stating, "Private parcel. No utility access granted. Contact required before future routing." I scanned it, filed it, saved copies to the cloud, the hard drive, and 2 USB sticks. Then I turned my attention to the clubhouse, or more precisely what lay beneath it. Marlene helped. Her nephew was an apprentice electrician who had done odd jobs around the area. He confirmed what I suspected: the HOA clubhouse had no dedicated meter. Instead, it drew power through a sub-feed routed off of Karen's property, the same line I'd just shut off. That meant not only was the HOA siphoning power across my land, they were hiding the cost. There was no utility bill tied to the clubhouse because it was illegally piggybacking on private connections. That's why Karen panicked when the power went out. It didn't just kill the clubhouse. It exposed a trail of financial and legal negligence stretching back years. Greg was thrilled. "This is more than trespass," he said. "It's misappropriation, possibly fraud. And if HOA funds were used in the installation, you're looking at a misuse of member dues. Is that criminal?" He shrugged. "Depends on how stupid they were." He drafted a formal complaint to the New Mexico Public Regulation Commission, attaching every bit of evidence we had. The buried lines, the unauthorized junction, the satellite overlays, the lack of easement, the meter records, or rather, the lack of them. It was a kill shot, but I wasn't done. Because while I waited for the bureaucratic wheels to turn, I still had to live here. And Karen wasn't going quietly. That same week, I got a surprise visit from a county fire marshal. "Anonymous tip," he said. "Possible code violations related to propane storage and flammable materials." I showed him the certified tanks, all stored per regulation, locked, vented, and recorded. He chuckled and shook his head. "She files one of these every few months. We've got a file just for her." But he made a note anyway because he had to. Protocol. Karen wasn't trying to win. She was trying to exhaust me. But I'd trained for long operations. I had food water grit and patience. The HOA, on the other hand, was cracking. A week after the power went down, residents began complaining on public forums. One woman posted that her kid's birthday party had to be canceled because the clubhouse had no lights, no AC, and no working bathrooms. Another wrote, "If we've been paying dues for a facility that has no legal power supply, where is that money going?" Marlene brought over a printout of an HOA message board post from an anonymous account titled Truth from the Inside. It read, Karen knew the line crossed the ranch property. The board approved the project in 2020. They just didn't think anyone would ever stop it. We've been lied to. Word was spreading. Greg advised me to hold the line. No press yet, he said. Let them bury themselves. When the commission responds, that's when we go public. So I waited. And then 10 days later, the email arrived. Subject confirmation of unauthorized utility installation, investigation opened. The state was launching a full inquiry. They requested access to the trench, the documentation, and all visual evidence. They thanked me for my cooperation and included a case number. I printed it, framed it, hung it inside the shed. That night, as I grilled steak out back with Duke chewing his bone beside me, I saw Karen again. She was pacing her porch phone pressed to her ear, a glass of wine, in her free hand trembling ever so slightly. Her lights were still out. The HOA generator had failed again. The clubhouse remained offline. The community was in disarray, and I hadn't even raised my voice once. All I'd done was dig until the truth came up like oil from a cracked pipeline. Dig until the current shifted not the electrical one, but the balance of control. And for the first time since moving here, I didn't feel watched. I felt ready. Because next, I was going to expose the entire rotten board. And this time, it wouldn't be with shovels or trench maps. It would be with the law. The letter from the state commission wasn't just confirmation, it was clearance. Clearance to act, to escalate, to take control of the situation in a way Karen and her HOA couldn't spin, suppress, or stall. Greg called me that morning, his voice calm but charged. They're toast, he said. Keep documenting everything. You're legally within your rights now, not just to maintain your land, but to begin removal of unauthorized infrastructure if it poses a risk. He paused. And Matt, make sure someone's filming when you do. That was all I needed to hear. I spent the next 48 hours preparing. I pulled out my old camcorder from my Army days, the one with thermal night vision and a side mic. I mounted it above the trench, aiming directly at the utility box and the exposed conduit I'd carefully unearthed over the past week. Then I called in reinforcements. My cousin Ray was a licensed electrician. He owed me one from years back when I helped him rebuild his house after a flash flood. When I told him what was happening, he didn't even hesitate. Give me a pair of gloves and a cold beer when we're done, he said. Let's make it legal. Ray arrived Saturday morning just after 8 a.m. The sun was already hot, but the air felt electric. We wore matching navy blue work shirts, protective goggles, and clipped radios to our belts like it was 2005 in Kandahar again. Ray crouched next to the exposed line, examining the fittings. He traced the current with a penlight, then looked up. Definitely not commercial grade, he muttered. This is a bootleg job. He tapped the conduit gently. Karen got a contractor to run this because whoever did it cut corners. PVC isn't even code for this kind of voltage underground. I filmed as Ray opened the secondary junction and began detaching the leads. The moment he severed the final one, the hum I'd lived with for months, subtle, almost subconscious, died completely. There was silence, but only for a second. From down the hill, I heard a screen door slam. Then came the voice I'd been waiting for. What are you doing? Karen stormed across the back lawn in slippers robe, flapping like some suburban battle flag. She didn't stop at the fence line. She didn't pause to assess. She stomped across my property like she still owned it. Ray stood up slowly, calm, professional. Ma'am, he said, please stay back. Live work site. Her face flushed red. You're trespassing. This is HOA property. No, it's not, I said, stepping between them. This is my land. This box, your illegal wiring, all of it was buried across my property without permission. She was trembling now. You can't just cut the power. I raised my hand and gestured to the laminated copy of the Public Regulation Commission's investigation notice posted beside the trench. Actually, I can, and I did. She looked like she might explode. Her jaw clenched so hard I thought I'd hear it snap. Do you have any idea what you've done? She hissed. I've restored control of my land, I said. You buried a line that never should have been here. You used HOA funds to power a clubhouse off an illegal connection. You harassed me, blocked my permits, and now you're exposed. I'll call the sheriff, she barked. They've already been here, I replied. I filed a trespass log, gave them footage of you standing exactly where you are right now. She faltered just a bit. That was when Marlene appeared. She stood at the top of my driveway, arms folded, watching the entire scene. Then 2 more neighbors appeared. Then a 4th. They weren't speaking, just watching. Karen noticed. Her face went pale beneath her blush. She turned, stormed back toward her yard, but not before firing one last warning. "This isn't over, Matt. You've made a huge mistake." I didn't answer, because by then I knew something she didn't. It was over. Not the fallout, not the investigation, but the illusion. The illusion that she had control, that the HOA was untouchable. That fear was governance. Ray finished sealing off the box and labeled the capped leads per state code. We buried it under fresh gravel, marked the spot with a GPS pin, and logged everything. Then we went inside and had that cold beer. It wasn't until later that afternoon that the emails started. First from Carter, the HOA treasurer. Then Shelby, who up until now had been a loyal second to Karen. Both of them wanted to talk, not to argue, to talk. By evening, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. The clubhouse had no power. Weekend events were canceled. No lights for the parking lot. No working kitchen. No AC for the summer programs. And then came the Facebook post. Breaking HOA clubhouse, lost power. Rumors say it was connected through a private homeowner's land without consent. If true, this is theft. We demand answers. It had 84 comments within the hour. By midnight, someone had posted screenshots of the investigation letter. Karen deleted her account the next morning. The board tried to hold an emergency meeting, but not enough members showed. People were jumping ship. Carter resigned. Shelby took a leave. Karen. She went silent. It's funny, power is invisible when it works, but when it goes out, everyone notices. And when you're the one holding the switch, you finally get to decide who's in the dark. In the days after I cut the current, Karen's world didn't just dim, it unraveled. The clubhouse, once a symbol of her domain, stood lifeless. The fountains stopped bubbling. The porch lights, those ever-glowing, overly festive string bulbs she insisted on year-round, hung limp and dark. Even the American flag out front had been taken down the pole, leaning slightly like it no longer had the strength to stand at attention. Rumors spread like wildfire, and this time I didn't stop them. I didn't have to. The truth did the work for me. The state's investigation was now public record, and copies of the initial report were being quietly shared through email threads, porch-to-porch conversations, and that same HOA Facebook group Karen once ruled with emojis and warnings. It wasn't just about the illegal power tap anymore. It was about trust. Homeowners started asking questions, real ones. Where did our dues go? How long had they been siphoning power through Matt's land? Did Karen know? Did the rest of the board know? Then came the paper trail. Carter's resignation email had been leaked, and in it was a single line that caught fire across the neighborhood. I voiced concerns about the power routing in 2021 and was told to keep quiet and keep up appearances. That was it. The dam burst. At first, Karen stayed indoors. Her porch remained empty. No gardening. No HOA newsletters. Then on a Wednesday morning, I saw her, standing at the edge of her driveway in slippers and a wrinkled gray robe, holding a box of old documents and what looked like a USB drive. She was staring at her garage as if trying to will it open. But with no power, the automatic system was dead. I watched from my deck, not out of spite, out of curiosity. There was something hollow about her now. The poise was gone. The tight bun she always wore had unraveled into frizz. She looked small, as if the HOA badge she once wore had been the only thing holding her spine straight. Later that day, Marlene came by. "Did you hear?" she said. "Depends. Karen's house has been listed, off-market, quiet listing to a private buyer." I raised an eyebrow. "She's running." Marlene nodded. "Word is she's trying to offload fast before the commission hands down the fines. She knows what's coming." It made sense. She was smart in the wrong ways, calculated, manipulative, a master of perceived order. But deep down, she knew the walls were closing in. The HOA board, once a 5-person council with quarterly wine nights and a Christmas lighting committee, was now reduced to one reluctant secretary and a part-time bookkeeper who couldn't even spell liability. Greg confirmed it. "They're facing multiple violations," he said. "At minimum, utility, encroachment, misuse of association funds, trespass. If they push back, we take it to civil court." But I didn't want a lawsuit. Not anymore. What I wanted was peace. I wanted my ranch back. I wanted the sound of goats in the morning, not citations. I wanted to rebuild what they tried so hard to dismantle. But first, I had one last thing to do. The HOA held a community forum at the high school cafeteria the following Saturday. It wasn't an official meeting, they couldn't meet quorum anymore. But it was open to residents. Marlene asked me to come. "You should speak," she said. "They need to hear it from you." I hesitated, then I nodded. I wore jeans, a clean button-up, and boots. Nothing flashy, just myself. When I entered the room, the conversations dipped. I wasn't sure if it was fear, respect, or guilt. Probably all three. The new interim chair, a nervous younger guy named Lewis, who'd only been on the board for 3 months, introduced the meeting and opened the floor. I didn't raise my hand. I just stood and walked slowly to the front the way I used to walk into briefing rooms, one steady footstep at a time. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. I looked out across the small crowd. Neighbors. Some who'd glared at me, some who'd whispered. I cleared my throat. "My name is Matt Harlan. I moved here to build a life, not to fight, not to cause trouble, but to build." I let that sink in. I tried to do everything right. I pulled permits. I followed code. I stayed on my side of the fence. A pause. But the HOA crossed that line. Not just physically, not just with wires under my land, but with the idea that they could control what they didn't own. A few heads nodded. I didn't cut the power out of spite. I did it because I had to protect what's mine. Because they never asked. Because they never cared. I looked down for a moment, then back up. This community deserves better. Not just better leadership, but better neighbors. The room was silent. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the whole room. Not a standing ovation, but something quieter. Respect. Outside, the sun was setting behind the hills. Soft golden light bled through the cafeteria windows, catching dust in the air like fireflies. I walked out alone, but I didn't feel alone anymore. Karen's house went dark that week. A for sale sign appeared on her lawn. Then disappeared 2 days later. I never saw the buyer. But I saw the moving truck, and I watched from a distance as she loaded her last box into the passenger seat of a black SUV. She didn't look up at my property once. She didn't need to. She knew. This was no longer her neighborhood. It never really had been. After Karen left, there was no public statement. No goodbye, no apology. Just a darkened porch and a realtor's lockbox swinging quietly from her front doorknob. But the real reckoning was only just beginning. The State Commission's formal findings arrived in a thick envelope, pages stamped, notarized, signed with the authority of people who didn't blink at HOA titles or neighborhood gossip. Unauthorized utility infrastructure discovered beneath private parcel. Violation of New Mexico Utility Access Code. Fines assessed. Remediation ordered. Greg grinned as he handed me a copy. That's about as close as the state gets to saying you were right. The commission imposed a fine on the HOA for each day the illegal conduit had remained active, accruing retroactively from the day I bought the property. It added up to just over $87,000. They were also ordered to remove all unauthorized lines and restore my land to pre-installation condition at HOA expense under licensed supervision. But here was the problem: the HOA was broke. Karen had funneled funds into pet projects, clubhouse redesigns, and of course the underground power scam. There were no reserves left. When the fine hit, the board tried to levy a special assessment, an emergency charge on every homeowner to cover the costs. That's when the rest of the neighborhood snapped. An impromptu meeting was held in the community park. No gavel, no agenda. Just angry people with folding chairs and printed statements. One woman stood up and waved her HOA bill. "You're telling me I have to pay $1 and $100 because Karen buried a power line under someone else's land?" A man in cargo shorts shouted, "She lied to us for years. What else don't we know?" The few remaining board members tried to calm the crowd, but the truth had reached critical mass. By the end of the night, a petition had started to dissolve the HOA entirely. In most neighborhoods, that's nearly impossible. But Coyote Glen was young, formed just 8 years prior. The bylaws allowed for dissolution if 80% of homeowners signed an agreement. By the end of the week, 86% had. Greg helped draft the paperwork. It took 2 months, but by late fall, the HOA was officially disbanded. No more board, no more fines, no more Karen. In its place, a voluntary neighborhood council was formed. No dues, no power, just communication. People could opt in or ignore it. No enforcement, only conversation. It was peaceful. In the aftermath, I received letters. One from Shelby, the former board secretary. She admitted that she had known about the utility lines. She said she stayed quiet out of loyalty and fear of Karen's wrath. She ended her letter with one sentence that stuck with me. "You reminded us that silence is a decision. I'm sorry for mine." Another came from Carter, the ex-treasurer. He offered to help cover the costs of restoring my trench using his own funds. He even came out one Saturday with work gloves and a wheelbarrow helping me shovel fill dirt into the scar Karen had left behind. Maybe guilt, maybe redemption, I didn't care. We worked side by side in silence, and that was enough. The land healed slowly. The goats arrived in mid-October, 3 rescues, all curious and loud. Then came the hens. Duke took his new role as ranch guardian, seriously lounging in the sun near the coop ears, twitching at every flutter of feathers. I finished the barn, painted it myself in the rich, warm red I'd chosen from the start, the one Karen had said didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. Now it stood proud against the sky, catching the sunrise like a flame. The silence changed. It wasn't the same heavy, suspicious quiet from before. Now it was the peace of a place left to its own rhythm. A rooster crowing, wind cutting across the hill, the soft hum of solar panels tracking the sun. One morning, as I was tightening a gate hinge, a boy rode by on a bike. He waved. "Hey, you're the guy who took down the HOA, right?" I smiled. "No, son," I said. "I just reminded people where their fences end." He rode on the gravel, crunching beneath his tires. I stood there a moment longer, staring out across the land, my land. Unencumbered, unapologetic, undisputed. The scars were still there, faint outlines in the earth where lines had once stolen energy without asking. But they were healing. And beneath it all, a new current was flowing. Not electricity, but something far more powerful. Respect. It's strange the way silence changes when it belongs to you. There was a time when silence felt like isolation, like being outnumbered, like standing on your porch with a citation in one hand and a neighbor's glare in the other. But now silence feels like freedom. The ranch is alive in ways I never imagined during those first weeks of dust and standoffs. The goats bleat with personality. The chickens roam freely, their pecking and clucking a rhythm all their own. And Duke, he patrols like he owns the place, which in a way he does. I added a rain catchment system to the back side of the barn. Installed a small greenhouse made from salvaged windows Marlene gave me. Every board, every nail, every solar panel has my fingerprints on it. It's mine, not just legally, but spiritually. And no board, no Karen, no clipboard warrior with a laminated badge can take that away again. Some nights I sit out on the back deck with a cup of coffee or something stronger, watching the sun bleed into the hills. That orange to indigo stretch of sky, the kind you only get in this part of New Mexico, turns my land gold before it gives way to stars. It's in those moments that I think about the journey, about everything it took to get here. The resistance, the escalation, the humiliation, the hard-won vindication. If you had told me when I moved in that I'd have to fight to use my own land, that I'd be dragged into battles over the color of a shed, or that I'd end up exposing an entire HOA for fraud, I might have turned the truck around. But I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't. Because this ranch isn't just a plot of land with goats and fencing. It's proof that standing your ground matters. That the small fights over trench lines and power cables sometimes reveal the bigger war, a fight for self-determination, for dignity, for the right to live without being watched, managed, and controlled by people who confuse order with ownership. The irony is I never went looking for a fight. I came here for healing. I came here because I needed to rebuild not just a barn, but myself. And through the noise, through the cease and desist letters and fire marshal visits and Facebook rumors, I found it. I found community too. It started small. Marlene dropping off eggs. Carter showing up with a shovel. Parents from the neighborhood asking if their kids could come pet the goats. So I said yes. I opened the gate on Saturday mornings. Put up a hand-painted sign that read, Harlan Ranch, petting hours, 10 to 2, no HOA required. It was a joke at first. But people came, not just for the animals, but for what the place represented. Something unpolished, unmanaged, authentic. A man brought his father, who used to own a farm in Colorado. A woman brought her autistic son, who had never touched a live animal before. A teenager came by on his bike and helped me muck the pens without being asked. The land became more than a ranch. It became a refuge, not just for me, for them. And maybe that's what I needed all along. Not a war, but a reason. The HOA was gone, but its ghost lingered in other neighborhoods. Other homeowners messaged me, some from nearby towns, some from across the country. They'd heard the story, heard about the rancher who took down the board, about the power lines, the trench, the meeting where the crowd turned. One man wrote, "Your story gave me the guts to fight back. My HOA was bulldozing my native plants, calling them weeds. Not anymore." Another said, "They fined me for putting up a clothesline. But your story reminded me I don't need their permission to live simply." I didn't set out to start a movement, but I'll admit it felt good. To know that my fight lit a fuse somewhere else. That maybe, just maybe, standing my ground helped others plant theirs. The soil out here is tough, dry, unforgiving. But if you work it long enough, deep enough, it holds roots. And roots hold you. Karen, I don't think about her much anymore. Last I heard, she moved to Arizona, some gated community with strict fencing codes and enforced driveway measurements. She'll be fine. People like her always find another HOA to haunt. But I'm not haunted. Not anymore. I'm home. The barn is full. The sun is rising. The roosters are crowing. And this land once under siege now sings. It sings of liberty, of stubbornness, of the quiet power that comes from knowing where your line is and refusing to let anyone cross it. This is my ranch. This is my land. This is my peace.